In 1870, the promise of America was a beacon, a distant gleam piercing the darkness of despair. For millions, it was their last hope, a silent cry against the hunger, war, and oppression of their homelands. Imagine yourself on an overcrowded steamship, swaying on the relentless waves of the Atlantic for weeks on end. Your stomach empty, your body exhausted, but your heart was filled with a dizzying mix of uncertainties and an almost blind faith in the future. You are Liam O'Connell, 22 years old, in Ireland. With its green lands and its painful memories of a famine that still haunted, was left behind, a scar on your soul. Before you, a silhouette of smoke and promises rises. A mirage of brick and steel that slowly materializes on the horizon. New York. The salty sea air mixes with the pungent smell of burning coal, with a distant hum of a city that never sleeps. A chaotic anthem of a new era. Your eyes, tired from gazing at the gray horizon, now fixate on the grandeur approaching, a promise that seems almost unreal. But would this metropolis of nascent skyscrapers and cobblestone streets be the paradise everyone spoke of? The El Dorado of opportunities, or just another chapter of struggle, a new hell disguised as hope? The first step on American soil is not a red carpet, but a cold, noisy ground, a stage of shattered dreams and new ambitions. Castle Garden, the gateway to America in 1870, is a whirlwind of languages, smells, and emotions, a true human melting pot. Endless queues stretch through crowded halls, where hurried bureaucrats, with indifferent gazes, process entire families, often separating them with the stroke of a pen, a destiny sealed on a piece of paper. You are just another face in the crowd. Liam, a number in a registry, your individuality swallowed by the mass. Name, age, occupation, money. The questions come in rapid English, a torrent of words you can barely decipher, and you, with your rudimentary English, struggle to understand, to answer, to avoid making a mistake that could cost everything. Hope mixes with fear as your few possessions, a bundle of worn clothes, a battered Bible, and a few cents saved with years of sweat, are searched by hasty hands. The confusion and noise are palpable, a dissonant chorus of voices in German, Italian, Yiddish, and, of course, familiar Irish, all clamoring for attention. For a future, the city, which seems so inviting from a distance, now reveals itself as an indifferent monster, a gigantic machine that chews and spits out destinies. But you must go on, there's no turning back. Where to go? What to do with this newfound, yet terrifying, freedom? Your initial destination, like that of so many others, is the Lower East Side, the immigrant melting pot, a neighborhood that pulsates with life and misery. The streets are a labyrinth of tall, narrow buildings, the famous tenements, with clothes hanging from windows like flags of a cramped life, a silent testament to overcrowding. The ground is dirt or uneven cobblestones, littered with accumulated garbage, food scraps, papers, and debris that mix with the dust. Barefoot children play in the street among horse-drawn carts, their shouts and laughter contrasting with the harshness of the environment. The air is thick with the smell of burning coal, the sweat of thousands of bodies, cheap food being prepared on wood-burning stoves, and the pungent odor of sewage rising from open drains. You walk, Liam, lost, your eyes observing every detail, every face, every scene of a reality that surpasses any tale you've heard. You see faces like yours, pale and marked by the journey, but also Germans, Italians, Jews, Chinese, all seeking a place in the sun, all fighting for a piece of this American dream. But how to find a job in a place where competition is so fierce? Language is a barrier, and exploitation is the unwritten rule. Your home is a tiny room, dimly lit by a single window overlooking a damp, dark alley where sunlight rarely reaches. It is shared with 5 other men, strangers who become companions in misfortune. The beds are makeshift, made of wooden crates and thin bug-infested mattresses. There is no privacy, no comfort. The air is stuffy. The smell of mold, bodies, and sweat is constant, a heavy fog that seems to suffocate. Water is a luxury, brought in buckets from a communal pump in the street, and hygiene, a daily challenge, a battle lost before it even begins. With each cough from a neighbor, a dry worrying sound echoing in the darkness. You wonder about the diseases lurking in the shadows, invisible yet deadly. The promise of America seems distant, almost a cruel joke, a fairy tale that crumbled at the first contact with reality. But hunger doesn't wait, and the need to survive is a more powerful engine than any disillusionment. After all, what is dignity when your stomach growls and your body cries out for a roof, however precarious? The sun barely rises, and you are already on your feet. Liam, even before the first rays of light touch the tops of the tenements. The room is still shrouded in gloom, but the need to work is an relentless alarm clock, more effective than any rooster. There's no time for luxuries, for a decent breakfast, a gulp of cold water, the same clothes from yesterday, already worn, dusty, and carrying the persistent smell of the factory, are your morning routine. The city, outside, begins to murmur, awakening to another day of struggle. with the distant sound of roosters and the creaking of carts already moving through the cobblestone streets. You feel the morning chill penetrate your bones, a constant reminder of life's harshness. But how to find the strength to face the journey when your body still yearns for rest, and your mind, for a moment of peace that seems never to arrive? On the way to the factory, you are not alone. The streets fill with familiar faces, other immigrants, each carrying their own story of sacrifice and hope, their hurried footsteps echoing in the broken silence of dawn. A nod, a quick smile, a few words in Irish exchanged in a low voice, a bond of recognition worth more than gold. This is your tribe, your support network in an indifferent world, a small oasis of familiarity in a desert of strangers. They understand your pain, your hope, your silent struggle, for they live the same reality, shoulder to shoulder. You see the determination in their eyes, the same you feel in your own heart, a flame that refuses to be extinguished. You observe the hurried mothers, the fathers with shoulders stooped by the weight of labor, the barefoot children playing, oblivious to the dirt, yet already marked by life. With each step, you feel part of something larger, a human current that moves the city. But would this solidarity, however strong, be enough to overcome the daily challenges imposed by the city, the dangers lurking around every corner, with every exhausting journey? You try at the port, where muscles are currency, and the smell of fish, tar, and sweat permeates the air. Strong men compete for every load, for every day's work, and the struggle is constant. You try in the factories, where the deafening roar of machines and the infernal heat are the norm, a hell of iron and steam. You carry boxes, clean streets, do anything that pays a few cents, your worn shoes marking each step of desperation and persistence on the uneven cobblestones. Rejection is constant, looks of contempt, frequent, and humiliation, a heavy burden. But with each no, the determination of your family in Ireland echoes in your mind, a reminder that you cannot fail. But how to maintain hope when your body aches, your soul tires, and the city seems to conspire against you, day after day? Finally, a job. It's not what you dreamed of, it's not the promised wealth, but it's a start, a thread of hope. In a textile factory, the roar of the machines is a monster that devours your hearing, a constant din that drowns out any thought, any lament. The air is thick with dust and cotton fibers, clinging to your throat, and the smell of oil and sweat is constant, permeating your clothes and skin. You repeat the same movement, hour after hour, day after day, your hands dirty and calloused, your skin rough from constant friction with the material. The wages are miserable, barely enough for rent and a little food, a precarious existence. The supervisor is a tyrant, his shouts echoing over the machine noise. And safety is a cruel joke, a word that doesn't exist in the factory's vocabulary. You see the exhaustion in your colleagues' eyes, the resignation in their slumped shoulders, the shadow of illness on their pale faces. But, amidst this brutal routine, is there any chance of advancement, of a better future? Or are you forever trapped in this cycle of labor and misery, a slave to the machine? Every day, the factory consumes your energy, your youth, your body aches, your muscles protest, but your mind refuses to yield. You observe the other workers, many of them older, their faces marked by hard life, their eyes dull. They are a mirror of what you might become if you don't fight, if you don't find a way out. Discipline is ironclad, hours endless. The sun streams through dusty windows, marking the passage of time. But for you, time seems to stand still, an infinite repetition of movements. Dust accumulates in your lungs, a silent threat that many of your compatriots have already felt. You wonder if the freedom you sought in America is not, in fact, a new form of captivity, an invisible shackle forged by labor and necessity. But what else could you do? Returning to Ireland is not an option, and inaction is death. As night falls, your body aches, but your mind is alert, a beacon of resistance. You made it. Another day of work, a few more hard-earned cents in your pocket. On the way back to the tenement, the street takes on a different life, a vibrant contrast to the factory's darkness. Street vendors shout their wares, their hoarse voices echoing between buildings. Music from a bar drifts out, a joyful and melancholic sound at the same time, and the faint light of a gas lamp illuminates your path, casting dancing shadows on the cobblestones. You buy a loaf of bread and a piece of cheese, your meal for the day, savoring each bite as if it were a feast. For it is the fruit of your own effort. The light illuminates your face, revealing deep weariness, but also an unyielding resilience, a spark of hope that refuses to be extinguished. You are in New York, 1870, and your journey is just beginning, a personal epic amidst the building of a nation. But what does tomorrow hold for a man who traded everything for an uncertain promise, and who now faces brutal reality with his head held high? The sun still slept when Liam O'Connell was already on his feet. Even before the first rays of light could pierce the dense fog of pollution that hung over the tenement rooftops, the room, which he shared with 5 other men, was a sanctuary of darkness and silence. But the need to work was an relentless alarm clock, more effective than any rooster. There was no time for luxuries, for a decent breakfast, a gulp of cold water, perhaps a piece of stale bread saved from the night before, and the same clothes from yesterday, already worn, dusty, and carrying the persistent smell of the factory, were his morning routine. Liam felt the morning chill penetrate his bones, a constant reminder of life's harshness, but his mind was already focused on the day ahead. The city, outside, began to murmur, awakening to another day of struggle, with the distant sound of roosters and the creaking of carts already moving through the cobblestone streets. He wondered, in his morning silence, how to find the strength to face the journey when his body still yearned for rest, and his mind, for a moment of peace that seemed never to arrive. On the way to the factory, Liam was not alone. The streets filled with familiar faces, other immigrants, each carrying their own story of sacrifice and hope, their hurried footsteps echoing in the broken silence of dawn. A nod, a quick smile, a few words in Irish exchanged in a low voice, a bond of recognition worth more than gold. This was his tribe, his support network in an indifferent world, a small oasis of familiarity in a desert of strangers. They understood his pain, his hope, his silent struggle, for they lived the same reality. Shoulder to shoulder, Liam saw the determination in their eyes, the same he felt in his own heart, a flame that refused to be extinguished. He observed the hurried mothers, the fathers with shoulders stooped by the weight of labor, the barefoot children playing, oblivious to the dirt, yet already marked by life. With each step he felt part of something larger, a human current that moved the city. But would this solidarity, however strong, be enough to overcome the daily challenges imposed by the city, the dangers lurking around every corner, with every exhausting journey? Inside the factory, the rhythm was relentless, an infernal symphony of metal and steam that deafened the soul. The machines roared, the gears spun with incessant fury, and danger lurked in every corner, a constant shadow over the workers. Liam saw a colleague scream in pain, his hand caught in a machine, blood staining the fabric he was processing. There was no time for lament, for adequate first aid. The supervisor, a harsh man with an invisible whip in his voice, shouted for everyone to continue, and life was cheap there, cheaper than the fabric they produced. Liam felt fear, a chill that ran down his spine, but the need to keep his job was greater, pushing him to continue the repetitive, mechanical movement that seemed to steal his soul. He observed the pale, sweaty faces around him, their eyes fixed on the machines, resignation etched into every line of expression. The air was thick with dust and cotton fibers, clinging to his throat, and the smell of oil and sweat was constant, permeating his clothes and skin. With each hour, Liam's body protested, but his mind refused to yield, driven by the image of his family in Ireland. How to survive in an environment where human life seemed to have so little value, where profit was the only deity and safety, a distant illusion. The brief lunch break was an oasis, a precious respite amidst the chaos. Sitting on the dirty factory floor, Liam and his colleagues shared their simple packed lunches, perhaps a piece of bread and some cheese, or a thin stew brought from home. Conversations were about Ireland, about letters arriving from home, news of distant relatives, about dreams of a better future that seemed increasingly distant, yet were still nurtured. It was in these moments that humanity flourished, that solidarity strengthened, and laughter, even if rare and muffled by the machine noise, echoed like a balm for the soul. Liam felt a warmth in his chest, a reminder that he was not completely alone, that there were bonds connecting him to these men. They talked about the bosses, about injustices, but also about small victories, the few extra cents they managed to save. Camaraderie was a shield against the day's harshness, a moment to recharge their strength. But would these small joys, these brief moments of communion, be enough to nourish the soul amidst so much hardship and despair that immigrant life imposed? After work, the neighborhood came alive, an explosion of colors and sounds that contrasted with the factory's gray monotony. The Irish church, with its modest spires, the pub with its folk music and the smell of beer and pipe smoke, the imported goods stores selling a piece of the homeland. These were pieces of Ireland transplanted to New York. Liam heard the folk music coming from a pub, the laughter, the conversations in his native tongue, a sound that soothed his soul and transported him, for a brief moment, back home. It was there that he found a sense of belonging, a refuge from the city's harshness, a place where traditions were kept alive, where identity was not lost, where he could simply be Liam, the Irishman. He saw women in their colorful shawls, men in their hats, children running and playing, oblivious to adult problems. The community was a tight embrace, a safe harbor. But could this bubble of familiarity, this small piece of home, truly protect him from the challenges and temptations of the outside world, from the city that surrounded him with its promise of opportunities and its hidden dangers? In the pub, with a cheap beer in hand, Liam felt at home, if only for a few hours. The warmth of the fire in the hearth, the hum of conversations, the smell of malt and tobacco created a welcoming atmosphere. Conversations were about local politics, about the gang bosses who controlled the neighborhood with an iron fist, about job opportunities that appeared and vanished as quickly as smoke. It was a vital information network, a place where the community organized and protected itself, exchanging advice and warnings about dangers and chances. Liam learned about the dangers, but also about the chances, about the small loopholes in the system that could be exploited. He heard stories of success and failure, and each one was a lesson, a warning, an inspiration. He saw men who had arrived with less than him and who now had a small business, a family, a future. But how to navigate this labyrinth of influences and power, of promises and betrayals, to secure his own future and that of his family without losing his way. Before sleeping, by the faint light of a candle flickering in the small shared room, Liam wrote a letter to his family in Ireland. The pen scratched on the cheap paper, and each word was an effort, a silent confession of his struggle. He tried to paint an optimistic picture, speaking of opportunities, of the city's grandeur, of the promises he still cherished in his heart. But the truth was harsher, and he omitted the details of the factory. The dirt of the tenement, the loneliness that sometimes assailed him like a cold fog, a burden he did not want to share. The letter was a vital link, a promise that he was fighting for them, a hope that kept him going, even when everything seemed to crumble. He sealed the envelope with wax, a small ritual of faith and determination, before entrusting it to a friend returning to Ireland. But was this promise, this burden of hope, an overwhelming weight that consumed him, or an unwavering motivation to continue, to never give up, no matter the cost? Liam lay on his makeshift bed, the thin mattress creaking under his weight, his body exhausted, but his mind still active. The street noise still echoed, muffled but present. Voices, laughter, the trot of horses, the distant whistle of a ship in the harbor. He closed his eyes, and the day's images mingled with dreams of Ireland, of the family he left behind, of the green fields that seemed so distant. With each breath, he felt the factory dust in his lungs, a constant reminder of his new reality, of his new battle. His mind, however, did not stop. It planned, it dreamed, it sought solutions, small paths to advancement. He knew that life there was a daily battle, a silent war, but he also knew that each day overcome was a small victory, one more step towards his goal. And in this New York of 1870, where every immigrant was a builder of a new world, what would be his next step to turn promise into reality, to forge his own destiny? In New York, 1870, nature was also a relentless enemy, as treacherous as any factory supervisor. A rainy day transformed the dirt streets into rivers of mud and garbage, with the sound of heavy rain and wind howling through the gaps in the buildings, a constant lament that seemed to echo the very misery of the neighborhood. The cold penetrated Liam's bones, a chilling dampness that seemed never to leave, and with every drop that fell from the gray sky, the threat of fever or cough increased, a constant worry that weighed on his mind. He tried to protect himself with his worn hat and thin coat, but he knew that with every step in the mud, every shiver, he was more vulnerable. The city, under the rain, revealed its cruelest face, with garbage floating in puddles and the smell of sewage intensifying. How to maintain health and strength in such a hostile environment, where medicine was an unattainable luxury and hygiene, a constant challenge, a battle lost before it even began. Disease was a constant shadow, a silent predator lurking in every dark corner of the tenements. In these overcrowded buildings, tuberculosis, cholera, and smallpox spread like wildfire, silent and deadly, claiming lives indiscriminately. Liam saw neighbors waste away, their bodies weakening, their hopes fading. Charity hospitals were overcrowded, with makeshift beds in the corridors. And treatment was rudimentary, often ineffective, more an empty promise than a cure. For an immigrant like him, falling ill meant losing his job, losing the little he had, perhaps even his life, leaving behind just another tragic story. He heard the incessant coughing of neighbors, the muffled laments, and felt a chill run down his spine, knowing he could be next. Each morning, waking without a fever, was a small victory, a temporary relief. But was there any hope of protection against this invisible threat, or was he at the mercy of the city's cruel fate, a mere number in the mortality statistics? Amidst the struggle for survival, politics infiltrated every aspect of life, an invisible web of power and manipulation. The ward healers, local bosses, were omnipresent figures, promising jobs, a plate of food, even a bit of coal for winter, in exchange for a vote. They were the bridge between immigrants and power, but also the exploiters of their vulnerability, using need as currency. Liam observed these noisy rallies, where speakers gesticulated and promised worlds. Skeptical, yet with a glimmer of hope, for any help was welcome in his precarious situation. He saw the crowd of immigrants, hungry for promises, for a glimpse of a better future. He knew these men did not act out of altruism, but out of self-interest, building empires of influence on the backs of the most needy. Was it possible to trust these empty promises, these forced smiles, or was it just another form of disguised exploitation, a new kind of shackle for the newcomers? Sometimes, dignity had to be set aside, a luxury he could not afford. On days of despair, when wages barely covered rent and hunger gnawed, Liam found himself in endless queues for aid from charities or the church. The humiliation of begging was a heavy burden, a blow to his pride, but hunger was stronger, and the need to survive, paramount. He saw other embarrassed faces, but also the strength of those who refused to give up. The resilience in every gaze, in every gesture of acceptance. They were men and women like him, who had left everything behind, and now found themselves reduced to begging in a foreign land. With every thin bowl of soup, every piece of bread, there was a bitter taste of defeat, but also the certainty that he had survived another day. But how to maintain hope and identity in a system that seemed to want to crush him at every step? That reduced him to a mere spoken justice. For Liam and his peers, was often an empty word, a distant concept. If an immigrant was robbed, assaulted, or cheated, the police, often corrupt and prejudiced, rarely intervened on their behalf. The courts were a labyrinth of laws and procedures he did not understand, and the lack of resources for a lawyer meant that injustice was the rule. He heard stories of colleagues who lost everything to swindlers, of others who were arrested for crimes they did not commit, simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The law seemed to exist to protect the rich and powerful, not the disadvantaged. The feeling of powerlessness was overwhelming, a constant weight on his shoulders. How to fight for his rights, for a minimum of justice, when the system seemed to be against him, and his voice carried no weight at all. Even in hardship, there were moments of respite, small cracks of light that illuminated the darkness. Liam found an old newspaper, discarded in the street, and even with difficulty, tried to read the world's news, the headlines about progress and innovations transforming the city. He observed the construction of a new building, a nascent skyscraper, with its wooden scaffolding and the sound of hammers and saws, and wondered about the future it represented, about who would live or work there. There was a brutal beauty in this constantly changing city, an energy that, despite everything, pushed him forward, not to give up. He saw the strength of creation, the human capacity to erect the impossible. Was this energy, this promise of something greater, what kept him alive? Or was there something deeper, an inner flame that made him continue to fight, to dream? Religion was a fundamental pillar in Liam's life and that of his community. The Irish church, with its smell of incense and its Latin prayers, was a refuge, a piece of Ireland on American soil. There, he found solace, hope, and a sense of community that the factory and the tenement could not offer. The priest, often an immigrant like him, was a figure of authority and support, a spiritual guide and, at times, a defender of his people's rights. Liam attended masses, listened to sermons, and felt his faith renewed, an invisible force that helped him endure adversity. Faith was a shield against despair, a promise that, even on earth, there was a greater purpose. But would this faith, however strong, be enough to appease the pain of loss, social injustice, and the constant struggle for survival? At the end of the day, Liam found a moment of silence, perhaps looking at the river, where ships came and went, or at the city's horizon, as it lit up with the first gaslights, dotting the darkness. He thought of Ireland, of his family, of the promises he made to himself and to them. Melancholy mingled with determination on his face, illuminated by the golden light of the sunset that painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. He was a link in a chain of millions, building a new life, a new world, brick by brick, sweat by sweat. His story was the story of New York, a saga of courage and sacrifice. But what would be his legacy in this whirlwind of progress and sacrifice? And how would his individual struggle echo in the future of this constantly transforming city? New York in 1870 was just the beginning, a starting point for unprecedented transformation. The island continued to swell, to grow, to transform at a dizzying, almost feverish pace. The skyscrapers Liam saw being born, timid structures of brick and iron, multiplied, punctuating the horizon with their imposing silhouettes of steel and glass. Bridges stretched like giant arteries, connecting the island to the outside world, and the city became a beacon of innovation and power, with the sound of intense traffic, the honking of the first automobiles replacing the creaking of carriages, and the incessant hum of a global metropolis. The air, once thick with coal smoke, now carried the scent of progress, of electricity, and of new possibilities. But what was the role of Liam O'Connell and millions like him in this colossal metamorphosis that redefined a nation, that erected an urban empire on the sweat and dreams of so many? Liam O'Connell, like so many other immigrants who arrived with little more than hope, not only survived, he prospered, in his own way, a silent but profoundly significant ascension. With years of hard work, sacrifice, and unwavering resilience, he secured a more stable job, perhaps as a foreman on one of the many constructions that redefined the city's skyline, or even opened a small business, a modest dry goods store in the Irish neighborhood. His shoulders, once stooped by the factory's weight, now carried the dignity of someone who built something with his own hands. He was better dressed, his clothes, though simple, were clean and well-maintained, and his eyes, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now reflected the wisdom of someone who had won great battles. He learned the language, understood the rules of the game, and built a life for himself and, perhaps, for his family who may have come to join him, bringing with them the hope of a future he had promised. His story was not that of a magnate, of an industrial baron, but that of a builder, an invisible pillar of the city, one of the millions of bricks that erected the metropolis. But how did his individual struggle, his silent persistence, shape the social and cultural fabric of New York forever, leaving an indelible mark on the city's soul? The immigrant neighborhoods, once synonymous with misery and despair, began to organize, to flourish with a vitality of their own. Churches, schools, foreign language, newspapers, mutual aid societies, the immigrant community not only adapted but shaped the city in its own image, injecting new life into its veins. Irish, Italian, German, Jewish, Chinese cultures, all intertwined, creating the vibrant and multifaceted tapestry that is New York, a symphony of accents, flavors, and traditions that enriched the city in unimaginable ways. Liam saw his children, or the children of his friends, attending schools, speaking English without an accent, dreaming of futures he could never have imagined. He saw the strength of the community, the ability to unite to build a better future for coming generations. The streets, once dirty and dangerous, began to be paved. Gaslighting gave way to electricity, and hope, once a luxury, became a palpable reality. Was this cultural fusion, this collective resilience, the true engine of the city, the force that propelled it to greatness, to become a global symbol of opportunity? By 1900, New York was unrecognizable to anyone who had seen it in 1850. It was a monument to human ambition, resilience, and the capacity of millions of people to build a future, even under the most adverse conditions. Every skyscraper that touched the sky, every bridge that defied the river, every paved street that guided the incessant flow of people and vehicles. All of this was built on the sweat and dreams of immigrants like Liam. The city was a modern metropolis, with intense traffic, imposing skyscrapers that rivaled mountains, the constant hum of a global city that never stopped. The port, once dominated by sailboats, now teemed with gigantic steamships, bringing more and more people, more and more dreams. Liam, in his more mature years, walked the streets he helped build, observing the grandeur that surrounded him, a silent pride in his chest. Did his individual journey, his daily struggle, become the collective story of one of the world's greatest cities, a legacy that echoes on every corner, in every brick, even today? Liam O'Connell, now elderly, perhaps sitting on a bench in Central Park, the green oasis he saw being built, a marvel of landscape engineering, observed the modern city he helped erect. His eyes, now slower, scanned the skyscrapers that stretched as far as the eye could see, the bustling avenues, the people of all ethnicities who hurried past, a subtle smile on his face, a sense of duty fulfilled, of a life well lived, despite all adversities. The New York we know today is a living testament to his courage, his struggle, his unwavering faith in the future. A city built on the shoulders of anonymous giants like him. He could feel the city's pulse, the energy that he and his fellow immigrants had infused into its veins. And you, Fernando, can you feel the weight and glory of this journey? Can you imagine what it would be like to build your own future, brick by brick, in a completely new world, far from everything you knew, and see your work transform into one of humanity's greatest wonders? The story of Liam O'Connell is the story of millions. It is the saga of how faith in a better future, the strength of tireless work, and human resilience transformed an island into a global metropolis. It is proof that dreams, however humble, can move mountains and erect cities. Today's New York, with its diversity, its energy, and its ability to reinvent itself, is the living legacy of these men and women who, like Liam, dared to dream and to fight. They did not just build buildings, they built the soul of a city, a promise for future generations. Their story is a powerful reminder that every individual, however small they may feel, has the power to shape the world around them. If this journey through time has touched you and made you reflect on the indomitable strength of the human spirit, on the ability to transform adversity into triumph, leave your like, share this video with those who need a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to the channel for more immersive stories with AI Reconstruction. What other immigrant journey, what other transforming city would you like to explore through the eyes of those who built it? Leave your suggestion in the comments. Your participation helps keep alive these stories that shaped our world.